I don't really know why people would bother to read something that nobody bothered to write. Generally, what I look for in writing is strong perspective, is that research, and just sort of feeling like you're in dialogue with something.
Welcome to The Narrative, a series where I interview the best storytellers in tech. I'm excited to share my conversation with Anna Held. Anna is the head of content at Scale Venture Partners, where she leads editorial and helps the firm articulate what it stands for.
The biggest failure mode I see is being really pissed that your competitors are getting attention for doing something that you think is stupid, but you're also not going to put in the effort to do yourself. I feel cringe about LinkedIn or short form video, or I don't want to go on this podcast, and then being but this person who I think is dumber than me, is having all of the success doing these things that I don't want to do. Sometimes you just have to do it anyway.
In our conversation, we unpacked her perspective on what storytelling looks like in a world full of AI slop, why founders feel stuck and what they can do about it, and how to build a personal brand that actually maps back to the business. Okay, here's my conversation with Anna. All right, Anna, thank you so much for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, I think we should start with your background, because you kind of started out as a writer and journalist and then moved into venture. So I'm kind of curious, firstly, how you kind of got into writing, and then what prompted the shift into tech and into VC specifically.
Yeah, so I've always been a writer. I have my English degree, so that was something from the beginning. I was that I knew that I wanted to do, and I actually started out on the editorial side in ed tech. So I worked for one of the big publishing houses. I'm sure that if you've ever taken a college chemistry course, you've worked on a product, or you've used a product that I've worked on. So I started there on the new product and strategy team. So we actually did AI super, super early. It was 2013, we were doing OCR math analysis and things like that. So I got a little bit of a taste for working with startups, even though I was still on sort of the big company side. And I knew that I always wanted to get back into writing. I'd sort of meandered for most of my 20s doing a bunch of different types of marketing. I was in an in-house agency at The Atlantic for a little bit. I worked with startups. I worked on product marketing. I did curriculum development, a bunch of different things that all sort of danced around storytelling and writing, just in different forms. And then I just decided to make the jump. So I worked on the journalism side, as well as working with startups, and so continuing with some curriculum development, but also with startups from seed to Series A. So sort of bridging that gap for them before they're ready for a full content team or a full marketing team. So I love journalism. I love, essay writing. That's still something that I do, but the work that was actually paying my rent was working with all these tech companies. And it was really fun. What I loved about, doing the freelance thing and working fractionally was being able to jump in with all of these startups and all of these different markets. And, you get to take the macro view of what's working over here versus what's working over there. What are we seeing trend wise? While also being able to really dig deep in okay, how do we reach this particular customer set? What are people going to find interesting? What are these questions? And how can we follow the rabbit holes? So it was 2022, 2023 with the big tech recession, I worked mostly with seed and Series A. So there was a lot of client turnover just based on sort of the macroeconomic headwinds that were sort of facing everybody. So I sort of reached this inflection point. I'd worked with venture firms before and I really enjoyed it. But I was okay, maybe I'll move in-house. Maybe it'll be a tech company, maybe it'll be this, because I was okay, well, in order to be successful in the current climate, I think I would have to scale up an agency. And I made a business plan and started talking to designers to partner with and doing all of that. But then venture just really spoke to me, because you get to do the things that I just talked about that I love to do. You get to take the sort of big picture view while also diving deep into these markets. You get to think in a very specific way. And I figured if I ran my own agency, sometimes you actually become a little more divorced from the work. You become
totally
business manager. Yeah. And that's, I work with some amazing agencies now. I have some friends who run just the best shops. it just wasn't me. Like I
Hmm.
get to sort of stay in and do the work that I love to do, without having to like manage a budget and manage a team and do all the,
Totally.
not managing, I manage a team, but sort of that, I don't have to manage a business. I can just like do the work that I love to do.
Yeah.
So
It's funny you say that because like I'm literally in the same kind of position where like I tried doing like the whole trad agency route and like pre AI. And it just like, yeah, it just wasn't for me. Like I think like because it's inherently such a people oriented business, right? It's not like a software product. So like your headcount kind of scales with revenue. Um, unlike like, a software team where it's like five people building a massive product. And that was like pretty intense for me. And now I'm kind of settled, like I've kind of settled on this like fractional type situation that you spoke about, which is working fairly well. I don't know. I think it's also an interesting time just in tech and like in marketing because like companies are really rethinking what it means to staff like a content team and when is the right time. What are the formats? I mean, there's just like so much like blank space now, and people are kind of like felt like for a time there was like a playbook, almost like okay, like this is what you do at this scale, and when you get to that scale, you hire like your next person. And now I feel like we're in a chaotic time, but also kind of exciting because you can kind of like rewrite the rules based on like what you like, right? So that's always interesting. Anyway, but like so the move to scale was basically where you were just like okay, like I want to. Was there like something that drew you to tech specifically? Like even when you were a writer, like I know you worked at like Wirecutter and stuff like that, but like was there a specific thing about tech that drew you in?
I mean, it's the same thing that I think draws everybody in. It's just such a big thing. Like it's so dynamic. It's changing all the time. It influences people's lives and touches their lives like every day, right? Like I'm, attached to technology at all times.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just hugely influential, and it's the companies are structured in a way, for the most part, especially at the earlier stages, where you can have a real impact and you can experiment and try new things. And you're right that there are these playbooks that are sort of rinse and repeat, and it's all about execution. And but there's also room to play and to innovate, and it's a environment that really lets you sort of run towards that.
Yeah, totally.
There's all these sort of legacy traditional companies and media forms, and it's not that you can't do interesting things there, but I've, working in a legacy education firm, we had the mandate to be innovative and to really push things, and we just I like faced so much friction on the way of doing that. And then when I sort of moved over to startups into pure tech, um, I just heard yes a lot more. It was so much easier to actually do the stuff that I had wanted to do. I felt like very unleashed. And it's once that energy's out of the bottle, you really don't want to put it back.
Yeah, for sure. Like there's no like this is how things are done and that energy doesn't exist in tech, which is awesome. Okay, so I have a bunch of questions around your thoughts on like editorial strategy given that we're like drowning in a sea of content at this point. And like I was just like reading about Sora, like the app that OpenAI launched, and a lot of talk around like how AI slop is going to kind of dominate our feeds. This was the first time where like there was an AI release where I was like, is that the best use of capital, so very interesting times to live in, right? Irrespective of where you are on that spectrum. I'm curious how you think about like editorial, like in this space. Like, is it like a case of less is more? Where do you land on that spectrum of, hey, like, let's go full AI versus let's like actually augment human writers and storytelling capabilities with AI?
Yeah, I mean, this is going to sound pretty glib, but I think I stand behind it.
No, go for it.
I don't really know why people would bother to read something that nobody bothered to write. I mean, there are some real answers to those questions. Sometimes, like you just need the data. If it's there are reasons, but generally, what I look for in writing is that like strong perspective, is that research, and just sort of feeling like you're in dialogue with something. And that's hard with AI. I also, I feel like this is becoming less common, but I'm old school in this way. Like I like to follow writers. Like I like to see what people have been up to over the arcs of their careers. I like to, know who I trust. And especially now that, there's so much turnover in outlets. So following people. And I think that's interesting. I as far as my strategy, like I'm going to use it for the things that I think it's really good at, and some things it is better than people, and some things is definitely better than me, right? So I too am generally a techno optimist. It does really bum me out that there's all of this compute going to, sort of the AI slot machine. I'm like, but like, that has a really strong promise in, early diagnosis of cancer. Can we just like do that instead of
Exactly.
this?
Yeah.
Maybe. But it's interesting because I've seen it used a variety of ways, and I use tools like Descript that are super great. Like, I don't feel the need to have even a perfect transcript. Like an AI transcript is pretty good for me. That'll get me most of the way there. I'm not going to do things the hard way just because I want to do things the hard way. But I've seen from, like, we work with a variety of agencies and freelancers, and I've seen a real mix of sort of AI coming from them, which has been really interesting. Some of them are using it to really amazing effect. And because I'll be like, how did you turn this around so quickly? And then they walk me through their workflow. And it's interesting to see where people sort of take their own thinking and how they integrate that in using AI. Because I think that's the part that gets really tricky for people, because the writing is the thinking a lot of the time. And if you don't want to let AI think for you, or at least I think that there's a lot lost when you do that. So we're actually seeing some tools come through in sort of market analysis, but where that actually have sort of the human thinking built into the structure, and like, channeling specific research efforts, molding outlines, giving feedback at a more sort of traditional writing process kind of way. And that's been really interesting to see. But then on the other side, I get stuff that clearly hasn't even been fact checked. Yeah. It's just like the AI thing. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but the name that I gave you was right in the transcript. AI heard it wrong. Just do a quick fact check for me. That would be really nice.
Yeah.
So it's like any tool. It can be a crutch or it can be a superpower depending on like the hands that are wielding it. So, but I do think, especially sort of in the context of social and things like that, it makes me a little bit nervous just going full on quantity. At the end of the day, like, I think about content as having a minimum quality bar, and it makes me really nervous when that bar seems to be dropping. And that's, I think we're already sort of seeing that with LinkedIn, where there's just so much. And even if it's not written by AI, there's the algorithm chasing where the structure is a certain way.
A specific way. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's been true, I think, for a long time. And it's not even something that traditional media is exempt from, right? Like, we see on the front page of the New York Times, the structure of like, you wouldn't believe, whatever, like obviously click here to hear this like simple answer. People have to chase traffic. They have to chase numbers. I respect, understand, and I'm part of that game, right? But I do think there is something lost with that.
Yeah. That's the thing that I have a hard time kind of coming to terms with, right? Like, on the one hand, like, we are kind of playing the same game, right? Like, we cannot take the moral high ground of being like, hey, like, we're above this, right? But at the same time, like, I'm kind of with you where like a lot of this content is now like we're going towards like lowest common denominator type content. I wonder where editorial strategy goes from here, right? Like, is it a case of, less is more, or like, in a world where everyone's kind of putting out a lot of content, like, is there a place for like these really like high quality content pieces that go out occasionally? Like, that's kind of one world. Or is the other world where like you kind of play the game for what it is and like play it by the rules, right? Because part of me is also like, people do it because it works to a certain degree, right? So it's not ineffective, right? Or at least like gets their job done, whatever that is. Like, maybe that's getting leads for your startup or whatever. It's interesting. I think, coming from a journalism background, like, you've probably seen the shift as well, and like you see like how different writers kind of use it, across their workflow. So that's always interesting. Like, when you're thinking about stories at scale, like, like what does the flow look like? Do you have like writers on staff who you admire and respect, and you guys have like a established chemistry, or um, what does like a typical kind of thought piece look like?
Um, yeah, so just thinking about sort of like strategy in this sort of current age, and you're right, we're all playing this game, but like I do think that there will always be room, and it's becoming more of a strategic advantage to do the highly perspective, highly researched, high quality pieces. Something that I thought about even during when we were just talking about SEO like 5 or 10 years ago, right? It was okay, but what about the stuff that no one thinks to search for? Like that's the truly original stuff that is not just a simple question that you would think to Google, right? So, you can sort of game it a little bit and you can still like optimize, but the core of the content, you shouldn't be able to, like ChatGPT should not be able to write your thesis piece for you because you have to do the thesis thinking yourself. And that is what makes it interesting. And that's what makes it perspectived. And sort of from a strategy perspective, when we do our sort of hardcore investment thesis work, we're trying to reach a very small subset of companies. We're specifically not writing for everyone. And then, you want it to be brand aligned. You want to seem, smart and plugged in and engaged and like the right partner sort of writ large for startups at that stage. But we're usually looking at very specific targeted markets, a very small list of founders who we're essentially writing for. Like this is who we want to get in front of. And that is not, a scalable strategy, but for investment firms of our size and sort of the number of investments we make a year, that's actually a really great use of my time is to get in front of, those small groups of founders. So if I get in front of, 90 to 100% of the 200 founders that, that we're really, really interested in talking to this year, then that's great. And we can measure that. And we have seen that. And we know that it works. So that sort of big, scalable, reaching as many people as possible strategy that you get from sort of flooding the zone and going for quantity, that's just very rarely is that actually aligned with our strategy. We want, brand awareness. We want people to know us. We have content that's sort of targeted to that, especially through our go-to-market function. But for our super targeted investment content, like it's not for everybody. It's for a very specific group of people.
Yeah, and it should be like that, I guess. Like it almost self-selects for the right kind of person, right? Like someone who's interested in reading something that's like highly researched and thoughtful is probably the exact kind of person you want to talk to. So,
well, and it's a proof point, right? Like it's what I love about writing, and have always loved about writing, is it's a chance to show your work. It's a chance to show that you are smart and thoughtful and engaged, and it is the intro to you as a person, as a partner. And that I think is super critical in venture. It's so relationship driven. We are operating at a stage where, founders have seen early product market fit. They've seen proof that like the thing that they're building is working. We want to be the founder or the partners for them for this next stage where they're scaling a company. And, we've done it before. But like what we're sort of like, we want to show that we're going to be a good seat on their board, like a good board member. So showing that thinking, showing the care behind, how we think about the markets and how we think about growing companies, that's critical. That's really important. And there's a way that content can introduce those ideas and actually prove it in a way that even just like having a dinner and talking through it, it's just not really the same.
Yeah, no, I love that. And actually, this is why I encourage writers to at least quadruple their prices. Like when I talk to freelance writers, like firstly, there's like so many, like just because of the media layoffs and stuff, like there's so many like talented writers in the market. It's kind of a golden time. Like if you're a VC firm, like out in the market for a writer, like there are so many great writers, which is awesome. And the other thing is I just feel like because a lot of these like creation tools are kind of getting democratized, like there's a real need for artists, and like true like lovers of the craft of writing. And I almost feel like people should be charging a premium for that. But I still feel like we're stuck in this archaic kind of era of like we're still kind of paying contractors by the word, and these kinds of like old primitives that still exist. And it's only a matter of time before like some of this stuff fades, right? Like as like creating content is not like expensive anymore. Like anyone can write words. I mean, like AI can generate 1,000 words instantly, but it's really about like what you say, how you say it, and these kinds of. I don't want to say taste. I'm like trying really hard not to use the word taste because I feel like it's really overused. But it's really that, right? For lack of a better word, like just like judgment and taste. Like these things are like, these things are super crucial. As a segue, like I wanted to get into just, I'm sure you work with a lot of founders in your portfolio as well. I'm curious, like how you think about like almost like a minimum viable kind of content strategy for founders as they get started. Someone who doesn't have that like content creation muscle built up and they're kind of early in their journey. Like, how would you advise someone like that to show up online in a authentic and like sustainable way?
Yeah, I mean, as far as minimum viable contracts or content strategy is concerned, I did this project with people all the time, right? And if you're a founder, your time is super limited. I have found that if you can tell people to post on LinkedIn all day long, you can write drafts for them all day long. They need to have some buy-in, right? So how I have done this in the past is sort of the boiling the frog model a little bit, where we just do a little bit and a little bit more and a little bit more. And then it becomes this sort of flywheel effect. When actually content, you start to see results. And, after they get their first few emails that, lead to leads or even just encouraging and people know who they are. And, then they want to do more of it. I had a founder once that was at a conference and he introduced himself and they knew who he was, not because he was the founder of this company, but because of the content that we've been working on together. And then he was like, okay, let's do more. So it's just, you got to get in the game though. You got to get in the game for those initial things to happen. I do think that, especially for earlier stage founders, there's the free stuff. There's like, yes, post on LinkedIn, do all of that. You can have a much bigger presence than your company actually could potentially justify through founder-led growth, which I think I know it's like baseline, but there's a lot of room. There's a lot of room for success there. But especially at the early stages, I think thinking about it as integrated with community is really useful. It's at the stage where you should be talking to customers all the time anyway. So having it sort of integrated with the community strategy, I think makes a lot of sense. It also makes things easier, right? Like if you're plugged into your Discord or a forum where people are talking about your product and their problems that they're having and that kind of thing, that is how you build your content. What are the things people are talking about? What are the questions they're having? How can you fill this gap? It sort of leans into the building in public, because a lot of really good founder-led content and pretty much all social content should be sort of in tandem with community building anyway. Like that's how you should be thinking about it. So I think thinking about those two things as hand in hand as you're growing. Also, I think as a founder, it's easier to wrap your head around because you're like, well, I'm trying to sell to these people. So I'm talking to them all the time. So now I'll just talk to them in a different format. And I think that can sometimes be easier to stomach, especially I worked with a lot with technical founders who are just not by nature sort of public facing people. And they are more comfortable talking to people where they have this very strong foundation of common ground. So just making that feel good and authentic and grounded as they are starting to become that sort of marketing persona, I think can be really useful, especially at the early stages. And again, once you start to see it become successful, it becomes much easier to keep doing it.
Yeah, for sure. But is there do you go in with how tactical do you actually have to be with this stuff, right? Like, is it like, hey, 5 posts a week and 5 interactions a day? Or is it more like, okay, let's figure out where the people we want to talk to hang out? And is it more strategy stuff initially and then execution? Or you're just let's figure it out on day one. Let's post something today and then figure it out day by day.
Yeah. So it's both. Usually what I've started out with in the past with founders is, can you commit to posting 3 times a week? And then we will do on Mondays, we will do sort of what's going on in your business, like a building in public thing. On Wednesday, we will do market commentary. So what else is going on? What is also interesting to your key stakeholders writ large? And then Thursday or Friday, like a personal thing that makes people feel like they get to know you. Maybe it's, and it can be related to your business. It doesn't have to be like deeply personal, but like, you know, what was interesting to you about this 10 years ago? You know, like what is something that people can feel like they connect with you on? And that's 3 posts a week. And if you do 3 posts a week for a month, you will get some traction from that. And that's, I think it feels really manageable. There are these buckets, so you can start thinking about it. It's just building that muscle over time. And then once again, it's, I have found it challenging to jump in with a full social strategy for people, and then expect them to do it all and feel really comfortable doing it. And it's just not sustainable. It really falls off. And that's even with a sort of full army of support. You know, it's things get, you know, sort of laggy in the approvals process. There's sort of things that people can't put their finger on that aren't really working. So, you know, starting with something meaningful that's not necessarily 0 to 100, I think can get, you sort of get the process going and you get things working.
For sure. Yeah, I had two like follow-up questions. I think one was like just your take on, you know, there's like this category of founders, especially like with, you see this with like the latest like cohorts of YC, especially. It feels like that generation of founders are like, they're so like digitally native and like they're so good with marketing right from those initial days. And, you know, they're really like trying out different things, whether it's like, you know, like these selfie style videos documenting their journey on LinkedIn, or even like, you know, whether we like it or not is a different thing, but even what Cluely does, right? Like with their marketing, like how much of that, like, do you think is sustainable, versus how much of that is like, does it really like drive the business forward, right? Like, I feel like some of this stuff is quite, you know, I have my doubts around like whether it actually drives business outcomes. I don't think it's a bad thing necessarily, but yeah, I don't know where you stand on stuff like that.
Sure. So I'm borrowing this perspective from one of our senior partners does podcasts all the time. And they talked about this, and I think that it's pretty sharp. Like a lot of, I mean, it's hard to be a differentiated AI startup right now. A lot of the technology, especially if it's built on LLMs, which almost all of it is, it's not on its own differentiated. So you're having these companies come in and say that they won the market, and they are winning by marketing. They are claiming the space, and that's working. That's working. They're getting their customers, they're getting growth, and they're getting sort of public sentiment around the fact that they won, based on this marketing and based on the promise of what they're going to be able to build over, you know, the next how many quarters. And, you know, whether that's true, we'll see. But for some people, it is really working, and they're raising money off of it, and they're, you know, getting those initial growth numbers. We'll know in like 12 to 18 months whether everything turns and whether that actually worked, and all of that. But I mean, the strategy is, it's hard to argue with it, you know. And if you have a clearly differentiated product, that's great. But for a lot of the applied AI stuff, at this point, the differentiation is something like those gaps could be closed fairly quickly. You know, it's such a race against time for most of these companies. So being able to market yourself into winning a category is like, it's impressive. And,
Totally.
you know, we'll see. We'll see if it worked as far as like, you're actually going to build a generational business out of this. But, and there is part of me that like does feel a little like, you know, about some of it. But
it's TBD, I guess.
Yeah. And if I were running a company, I'd like, if I were coming in as head of growth of one of these things, I'd be like, yeah, let's do it. Let's stop market. Like, it's not a cheap shot anymore. Like it's working.
Yeah, for sure. And it's interesting, like the example I'm kind of reminded of always is, you know, the browser company, like when they invested heavily in storytelling, and like they used to do these really like high production videos, right from the get-go, actually, even before like they raised a lot of money. You know, it was always kind of like criticized, not by everyone, but like a few people were just like, is this needed? Like, you know, is this like overkill, like this level of storytelling? But I guess it worked, like the whole narrative around it, and like with the acquisition now, like I think you know a lot of the acquisition value did come from the fact that, hey, like these guys have built a brand around it, and it's actually really hard to get people to switch browsers. Like it's actually one of the hardest. Like the switching costs are so high, like to get someone to go from like Safari or Chrome to using your browser. And I think part of the reason why, I mean, it's a beautiful product. Like Arc was beautiful, and Dia is interesting as well. But like part of the reason is like they just built that like compelling like story around it. And yeah, that worked. So clearly there's a space for elaborate storytelling. Like this is like maximalism, right? But I love it, in the best sense.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, for sure.
All right. So another follow-up question I had around that was just your thoughts on like this whole going direct narrative versus the role of like mainstream media when it comes to like a PR strategy. I'm hearing all sorts of like hybrid approaches that people are trying, where like almost like Substack writers are the new like that's kind of your PR roster, right, so to speak. So you don't like call up TechCrunch, you call up, I don't know, Packy or whatever. So like I'm curious like how you think about that with founders. Like, are you still going towards mainstream media, or like are you like experimenting with some other stuff?
I mean, we're definitely experimenting with other stuff. We're launching sort of a newslettery pilot program for some promotion and stuff like that, which is exciting. And I struggle because I love traditional media. I read traditional media. I've written for traditional media, and it's not that it's not important. I'm not sure that the people who own it and run it think that it's that important when they keep laying off everybody and restructuring their teams and killing all of these relationships and all of these things. Like I would love to go to TechCrunch more. Like I would love to go to these, legacy people, but like they get laid off all the time. They're now off and working at Stripe or working, it's a shame. Like it sucks for them and it sucks for everybody. Like it's not good for the health of the ecosystem, in my opinion. But then we're seeing some really amazing, sort of media startups spin up as a result of this. It's like through Substack and podcasts and YouTube channels and all of these things. So, I mean, I think you have to meet people where they are. That strategy hasn't changed, but where they are is everywhere now. It's changing all the time. And again, sort of similar to what I was talking about with how we think about our investment content. I'm not always trying to hit 500,000 people. I'm trying to hit 500 people, but a very specific or a very specific group of that 500. So, and that is where newsletters are actually really great, whether they have, and they're typically priced based on like subscriber and open rates and stuff like that. So you can actually get pretty good deals if you're going sponsorship models for that, while still getting in front of exactly who you want to get in front of. So, I mean, I think it's really exciting. There's a lot of room for experimentation. Again, sort of what you were saying about sort of starting from scratch on a new playbook. Like, I think that's 100% what this is. But just as a consumer, like I love Substack. Like I read Substack all the time. Like I think it's great. Yeah. So.
Yeah, it's such a good thing for the ecosystem, honestly. And even like, I don't know where their whole like social feed primitive will take us. I'm seeing a little bit of the LinkedInification of Substack coming our way, but we're in a moment, and let's cherish this moment at least, like where like the content is really good. Like it's kind of reminiscent of like old Twitter, where like people are actually talking about ideas, and it's really cool. I guess like question there, like, is there a lot of like, so I see a lot of people also using like these anon accounts on Twitter. Especially there are like certain accounts that are very like AI forward that a lot of like researchers follow. Obviously there's stuff like TBPN, which is like a full circle like TV moment, right, for tech. Yeah, I'm curious like how you think about new media like that, and like if you have ever experimented with stuff like that.
Yeah, I worked for a crypto startup for a little bit, and they were, I think a lot of the anonymity coming back into sort of these personas, a lot of it, like, I think comes from crypto. I am always a little bit skeptical. Like what I was about to say is what I like about Substack is that, like, for the most part, it is real people. Like you see their faces, you can follow their work. There's sort of some accountability to, like a lot of self-publishing, there's just no accountability, right? And like it's, on accountability, but just like, you can back up what you say. You have the stats, you can fact check all of that stuff. So that has always made me a little bit nervous, but I have always been a little bit old school on that. And everything's changing so quickly. I think I was listening to, I think it was your interview with the head of publisher at Stripe, the works in progress guy.
Yeah, Sam. Yeah.
Yeah, that was great. And he was talking about how like you can be wrong a million times as a journalist and you never have to go back and say that you were wrong about something, because it'll like the future will just happen and change. And I sort of think of that. And so in that sense, it's actually really similar, and that like, especially on Twitter where we're all like shooting from the hip and things, have such a short lifespan. And there is definitely part of me that misses things being a little less ephemeral, but at the same time, like things are moving really fast. We are all online all the time. Things are changing every 10 minutes. And, I think new media is sort of the answer to that. And also like there's a void, right? Like there is a void that has been created by sort of the drop of traditional media and the democratization of publishing in general. And it just seems sort of a natural end to it. Or a natural conclusion, not a natural end. Like where, there's plenty of room to grow and change from here, but, and also like it works, right? Like it gets attention. And this is again, where like the attention economy makes me a little bit nervous, but we're all part of it. We're all in the game.
All part of it. For sure. Yeah. I think if I were to like summarize what you're saying is like attention acquisition is a thing, right? Like it's one thing to like attract attention online, but it's another thing to retain attention online, and kind of retained attention is a very different thing, right? Like there are certain writers, thinkers, creators that we go back to just because there's some level of trust that's established. And then there's a certain kind of consumption that we're all guilty of, honestly, right? Which is more like ephemeral, where we're like literally just scrolling, comes from a place of escapism and anxiety and all sorts of other stuff, right? And you can kind of quickly get those impressions, but just because someone, consumed your content that way doesn't really mean that it's going to lead to anything meaningful down the line. And I feel like in venture, at least the beautiful thing about venture is that like, it's important to have the second kind of attention, which is like retained attention. Like that's what matters, especially even if you think about it from an LP perspective or even from a founder perspective, like on both ends of that equation, you actually need retained attention. Whereas sure, like maybe if you're like a consumer product selling, I don't know, something that people don't put that much thought into, like before buying, then sure, like maybe that like attention helps, like the short-term attention, right? But yeah, ultimately, like you do want like retained attention, whether it's like, yeah, irrespective of like what you're building, especially on the enterprise side.
That's definitely true. I do think that the sort of, the classic, like it takes 7 touch points until there for you guys, I think, generally the shorter form stuff that helps remind people that you exist and, sort of builds that long-term attention, I think is good. I don't think that necessarily means, you have to publish a 4,000 word, really thought out blog post every 2 weeks to remind people that you exist. But that, they're all different levers and they all serve different purposes. And there's, the me that's a writer and a crafts person who just like loves my job because I get to be curious. And I think that everything can be interesting. So like, let's run towards that. And I think that in and of itself, like I like people who think that way, whether they're writers or not, just like, let's be curious and find out what's interesting here and like be open to whatever the answer is. But then also like, then there's the content side, right? There is the, how do we make this something that people are going to want to watch? The first 5 seconds is going to make them want to watch the second 5 seconds. And like, how do you earn that attention? And you can earn that through just being really, really good. Like you absolutely can. But like, yeah, let's also throw up some exciting graphics on a video to make it seem more exciting. There's like a lot of different things you can do to be strategic. And, there's a lot of messages out there that never really get heard because they are on their face, not competitive against the other stuff that's going on. So it's all like, I don't think that you have to sacrifice quality to participate in the ecosystem. But yeah, it's all there. There are many different goals. There are many different ways to the same goals. And just, I think now more than ever, like you just have to be open to trying new things.
Yeah, yeah, totally. A question on that front, like, what are some like mistakes you see founders making? Because you've helped a variety of founders over the years. So I'm like curious, like, do you see like some common like failure modes?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest failure mode I see is being like really pissed that your competitors are getting attention for like doing something that you think is stupid, but you're also not going to put in the effort to do yourself. Like that is the biggest failure mode, is being like, I feel cringe about LinkedIn or short form video, or I don't want to go on this podcast, or like I feel weird about going to this networking event or whatever, because like the participation in and of itself feels disingenuous or outside of your comfort zone or whatever. And then being like, oh, but like this person who I think is dumber than me, like is having all of the success doing these things that I don't want to do. But that's everybody's failure mode, right? Like that is not just founders. That is everyone. People talk to me all the time, like, oh, I want to be a writer, but I can't, X, Y, and Z reason. And all of the reasons, everyone has the same reasons. They're the same reasons that I have. And sometimes you just have to do it anyway. And that is the number one failure mode, is just not even thinking. Some people I think are above it, but I think for most people it's just, they're like, it doesn't come naturally, it feels awkward, and they're busy and they have other stuff they'd rather be doing, and I get it. But then it's really annoying when you see someone else use the same playbook that you have discarded and get really good stuff out of it. It's incredibly frustrating. So that's probably number one.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and like you get into like consumption mode, and you kind of like, there are so many times where like I have like this idea and I want to like write about it, and then I open Substack or LinkedIn or Twitter, and I just get into consumption mode. I see like 10 other people talking about random things. One is it distracts the hell out of me, right? And the second thing is like, it's just like, why bother, right? Like, why do this thing anyway? Like you kind of, so I'm like being very mindful of like, okay, like how do I like preserve that creative energy? Because like you spend enough time on these, it's funny because like you spend enough time on these feeds and it'll like suck the creative energy out of you. And by the end of it, you're like, why do it anyway? So I feel like a lot of people are kind of stuck in that, zone as well. But yeah, that's a super good one, actually.
It's incredibly overwhelming. Like all of this stuff is incredibly overwhelming. Not to, sound like an Instagram philosopher, but we were not meant to consume this much media. Like we weren't meant to see this much and read this much. And it's like we spend so little time synthesizing ideas, right? We're just like reading things. And like the most interesting ideas come from thinking about ideas, not just reading them, right? But if you're going one after another.
By the way, reading is the best case scenario. Like most of the times people are like watching things. So like reading is still, in my mind today, like kosher. But like if you're watching things, then you're like even more screwed. But yeah, I'm totally aligned on this, by the way.
I saw a meme like a couple months ago that was like, the problem with spending so much time on TikTok is then you watch Severance and it feels like you're reading a book. Like,
that's so good. Yeah.
It's bleak, but it's true.
Yeah, extremely true. Yeah. It's crazy. Like I mean, thankfully, like I haven't gotten hooked to like short form video, which is good. I have a YouTube addiction, which is a different thing. But I kind of justify it by saying like, hey, I'm like watching lectures, and like, like YouTube has some amazing stuff. Like they have like these Stanford and MIT lectures and stuff. So you could really like watch those, or like random parts of the world. Which also happens. But yeah, super interesting. So that's like a big failure mode, right? Like big theme is like, okay, you're kind of in comparison / consumption mode, and you don't do anything as a result. Anything else that kind of stands out?
I mean, that's like the really big one that I see from really early stage founders. Yeah, I mean, otherwise, I don't know. I'm trying to abstract things because I don't want to I don't want somebody to watch this and be like, oh, she's talking about me.
Yeah, fair.
I mean, I think what's really interesting now is like we're in this age of AI, and it is like it's in some ways never been easier to get attention. I mean, there's a ton of it, but like you can sort of do the Cluely playbook and things like that. And it's just a little bit harder, I think, to pivot on. No, I think I don't necessarily, I know I'm going to pull back because I'm not 100% sure that I believe what I'm saying. Because what I'm trying to get at is just that like you need to be sure that the thing that you're building is the right thing and customer aligned, right? Because like, if you're an infrastructure company, you want to build that trust from the beginning. So especially like if you're in something like security or whatever. So going in and running the same playbook that, a consumer company or just like that sort of stunt kind of thing, it's just not really going to work the same. Like you are going to get sort of that short-term traction and that attention. People might know who you are, but that might not actually lead to the outcomes. So I think, marketing for marketing's sake is, I think, kind of dangerous for everybody, right? Like I think all the time, like, am I doing a random act of marketing right now? Am I doing, oh, this is a cool idea that is sort of untethered from the bigger thing that we're trying to build? And I think that's like a founder issue in general, or just like a people in charge issue in general. Like, the sort of bright, shiny object of marketing. I think people also think that marketing is easier than it is sometimes. And then the actual like outcomes don't follow from the like super cool idea that was just a lot of money. So it's not that you can't do both, right? Like we have a portfolio company that did a Super Bowl ad, which like sounds insane because they were an early stage startup, but they did it really strategically. They did a very targeted market. They were really smart about it. And so like, wouldn't it, like, that's a crazy idea for a startup, for an early stage startup, is to do a Super Bowl ad, but you can do it in a way that is like hyper specific and drives towards specific outcomes, and like actually drives the results that you want it to drive. So if you're going to do a cool thing, you got to make sure that it's like attached to other stuff.
I mean, that's a great point, actually, because I feel like a lot of marketing metrics are kind of tied to like vanity metrics. And like we often use like consumer company metrics to measure what an enterprise marketing team should be doing. And you get like content that really does not need to exist. I also feel like the other thing that happens is like people want to add value, like they want to justify their salaries or their consultant fees or whatever. So it's very hard for people to say, let's not do anything. Everyone's always in favor of doing something. Actually, like we don't need to put out like 5 different things. We need to do this one thing that's going to like move the needle. And marketing metrics are not sales metrics where you can clearly see the prospect moving through the pipeline. It's fuzzy because you may have like a prospect who maybe reads an essay you wrote 6 months before they actually reach out. The feedback loops are quite long in content, and marketing people operate quarter by quarter. Right? They're not being judged by those metrics. They're being judged by, okay, like how many likes did this get, or how many website visitors did we get last quarter or last month, right? So there's a pressure to perform on that front, whereas actually like it's hard to like attribute like, these long tail kind of effects which actually move the needle, right? Like it's probably like that one lead that came in and led to a 6-figure deal is probably like worth all of the marketing investment. And everyone knows this, right? Like in theory, but like we're still measuring marketers based on, like website hits or impressions and stuff like this. So yeah, there's some like white space there for someone to build a tool that truly like attributes a lead from start to finish to the marketing person, the content person.
Yeah. To your first point, I think a great question to ask about anything that you do in marketing, but especially for content, is if we didn't make this, what would happen? Like what would happen, and if the answer is nothing changes, then that's not great. Usually we have a real answer, for every program, of course, but also for every content piece, we need to have a real reason that we're doing something. And that's sort of leading into your second point. In venture, I'm actually really lucky at my current position with Scale, where we have a really robust sort of data pipeline around just all of our communications and all of these things that aren't just marketing metrics. So I can see pretty clearly when I published something, if we have like increased inbound and things like that. We have sort of consumer-esque tools that measure these things. So it's not perfect, right? Like I can't tell if somebody read something 6 months ago and decided to reach out today, but I can tell that someone, might have emailed us saying that they weren't raising like 4 months ago. And then we write something and then all of a sudden they're emailing us again. Like that I know. So it's not perfect, but it's the most I've really ever been able to measure the success of content. And it's been incredibly encouraging. Like it's been really great because you just release things into the world and then you wait for sort of qualitative feedback. You can see the numbers that you can see. And, we track all of those things, of course. Um, and we track them over time. So like, we've, gotten really great newsletter pickup from pieces before. So I track that and like, okay, well, how is that going to change our pitching strategy? We follow the lifespan of these things in a way that is really useful. Like we use the data to help us sort of move forward on strategy. Obviously I am beholden to metrics, but they're more integrated into what we do every day. They're just part of the fabric of the firm. And I'm not a super quant person, but so I have a lot of help in sort of building these tools and using these tools. But we have been able to do more content attribution than I would have expected, especially because it is a little like venture is a little more wishy-washy on that than I think, especially consumer. But yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right. I think this is, sort of a bigger issue that I think about this a lot in sort of the creative side too. Like I have friends who are like diehards for 1,000 words a day for writing their novels. And I've tried to do that before, and it's good because it builds the muscle and it gets you into the practice of it. But also sometimes you just want to finish the words, and that doesn't mean that they are the right ones or good ones or a good use of your time. You can say it was a good use of your time because you did it that day, and that builds the habit, builds the pattern. Great, but like maybe that's all it was. And at my job, I want to push myself in a different direction than that. So. Yeah, it's hard, but it is getting easier. Like it is like, you have to really sort of look at metrics sideways, I think sometimes. But I have been really pleasantly surprised at how things have evolved over the last 5 and 10 years. And I think some of that is because all of these channels are opening up. Like there's so much more than there was before. So there's just more. Like it used to just be, okay, well, I knew that this clip got picked up at TechCrunch, and that was really clear. And now it's like, if I get a spike in traffic, I'm like, okay, let's look at the newsletters. Let's look at all of these other places. Let's try to figure this out. If all of a sudden one of our associates is getting all of this inbound, I'm like, okay, let's figure out why. Did a quote get picked up somewhere? Is this something that we did on the content side? Like, what is it? So it's not necessarily like served up on this nice little dashboard or anything, but you can hunt stuff down.
Yeah, I guess like certain patterns that you maybe have seen over time, and like just like look at those. Yeah, no, I love that. I know we are kind of at time, so like a closing question I always like to ask is like any like books or resources or even like non-obvious sources of inspiration that you'd recommend for founders and VCs who want to get sharp on their storytelling, and even like aspiring writers who want to get into writing in tech and VC.
I believe in a varied media diet, just as a sort of a general rule. I think it's reading with like a critical lens towards, do I even like this, is a really good first step. I've found that has been really useful for my own media diet. When I'm scrolling too much, I'm just like, I'm not actually having a good time. I don't like this. And that's been really useful. But then, that's how you hone your perspective, like your critical perspective, I know we're a literature word now, but taste, like that is how you determine. It's how you become a better editor. It's a better self-editor. It's just by reading in volume and really thinking about it and seeing what you like and finding the common threads in what you like. And that's when I worked with clients more directly. And it's still my first question for anybody that I work with. I'm like, send me what you read. Send me what you love. Send me what you hate. Like, send me anything that has moved you to the point that you remember it. And like, we will figure it out. And I think
I love that.
Yeah, it's such an important exercise. And I think it's, and I've always sort of run into this with writers where they're like, oh, well, I don't want to be too influenced. I'm like, read too much to be too influenced. Like read too much to have like one, perspective weigh you down. Like, have your favorite writer read everything that they write, but like read widely enough that you are sort of that the sort of broader influence is so diluted that it is just, you and the best of everything that you've read. Generally, something that I've been enjoying is the more like specific sort of craft-based business newsletters. Like I love Feed Me by Emily Sundberg, Link in Bio by Rachel Carton. Just sort of the daily reflections of what's going on in business and and it's their curators to like on the daily. They have like, the here's what's going on sort of news roundups. And some of it's venture, but some of it's outside of venture and more consumer stuff. And I think just it gives me a better sense of like what is going on in sort of the big world of business. but then they'll also do like good interviews and broader sort of media stuff. So that's just been really fun to see like how the newsletter trend is taking off in particular direction. I mean, we've talked about Substack this whole hour. But,
Any plans of starting your own Substack?
so I have this like secret. Well, it's not a secret if I'm talking about it on podcast. So what I've thought about doing forever is, so I used to teach. I do like this side life of like personal essay editing. I work for a literary journal. Like I have this like parallel sort of creative life. But anybody who's in like our seat in our position, they've like sold out from doing something, whether it's like journalism or fiction or whatever. And I've thought about for a while, like trying to start a Substack or community around the idea of like being a sellout and being like, okay, what is the thing that we're actually going to do though? Because every time I talk to anybody at like a networking thing or a happy hour or whatever, it's like, oh yeah, I really need to get back to this book, or I'm working on this memoir, or I'm like, just trying to like carve out that space in a world where like you're spending, we say 9 to 5, but it's probably closer 7 to 7 of like, this outcomes based, content driven, blah blah blah, like this sort of high production environment. And so I want to build something around that. I think it'd be fun.
So yeah, it's cool. I like the idea. I think there's something to it. So you should definitely do it.
Yeah, I have no like monetization plans. This is literally just because like I think it'd be fun and it's something that I like to talk to people about. And it's like, okay, maybe we do office hours, maybe we do creative exercises. Like I don't know, but I think that like being a craftsperson is what sort of separates like content. Well, and there is actually craft to creating content. I don't mean to say that there's not, but like I don't know, I think you can tell when somebody's in it for the love of the game, like, and I just am. I'm in it for the love of the game, and like that's true whether I'm working on like a fiction project that's just for myself, or I'm at work being like, okay, I'm going to make this paragraph really, really good. Like I care about making things really, really good. I like making things with my hands. I knit, I cook a lot. Like that is what makes me happy, is building stuff in that particular way. And it's entirely unscalable. I would love sometime to figure out how to apply it to a scalable thing and, all that. But
Do things that don't scale.
But I do think that I think it makes me like my job. Like I like what I do, and I like what I do with my waking hours, pretty much every waking hour. And that's, I think, more than a lot of people can say. So I'm not mad about it, even if it's not scalable. I'm cool with it.
Awesome. I love that. On that note, Anna, thank you so much for taking the time. This was awesome. I had a great time.
Yeah, this was fun.